All right. Well, today, this morning, hopefully will be just a review for you guys. We're going to talk about the third assignment for your Proverbs passage. And so far, at least yesterday, I've caught up in all the assignments that have been turned in up to the setting and structure I have graded. Okay. Some of you have turned in some additional assignments. I haven't got to those yet, but I've graded everyone that has turned in assignment 1 and assignment 2 for Proverbs. So those of you that haven't completed them yet, just encourage you to get those done. The third assignment for your Proverbs passage is on parallelism. And let me open up the example file for that. Where is it? Here we go. Okay. All right. Assignment number 3, parallelism. All right, and I will give you right after we're finished. I'll post on Facebook message group. I'll post the example for this assignment for you. But I'm going to go through this example with you right now. So we'll do a brief review of parallelism. Maybe I'll ask you guys to answer some of the questions here like we used to. And if you want to get a review further, the details for parallelism, just go to the third session of the workshop. And I've got a link here for that. You can go to this link and watch the video or look at the handout for that for more details. But we'll do a brief review here just because it's been a while since we talked about this. Again, remember, parallelism is just one element, one characteristic of Hebrew poetry. And if you will recall, parallelism is when one line of a particular verse, verses are usually in 2 or 3 lines. It's when it's the connection between those lines that exists, where the second line has some sort of link to the first within the verse. Okay, and so we'll talk about that in a little more detail in a minute, but the steps for the parallelism analysis, basically there's 3 steps. The first step is identify how many lines are in each verse. Again, this is for your passage. The second step is to then identify the type of parallelism between those lines. And then the third step is to summarize that, see if you find any patterns within that in your passage. Okay, so those are the 3 basic steps. So let's just go through those steps briefly to remind ourselves, and then we'll go through. I chose a passage from Proverbs chapter 1, so we'll actually go through a Proverbs passage together just to show you how the example. Okay, so the first step is to identify how many lines are within each verse of your passage. If they're 2 lines or 3 or even more, and so 2 lines would be bicola and 3 lines tricola, and if there's more than that, I just call it Coca-Cola. But so let's identify how many lines, and then I would like you to know which translation that you use, okay? Because it makes a difference. So the second step is then to identify the type of parallelism being used. Now, who can tell me what kind of parallelism we find in Hebrew poetry? Do you guys remember? What are the types of parallelism? Synonymous, good. Contrastive.
Yeah, addition.
Yeah, there's a third. What's the third category?
Developmental.
Very good. Developmental. Now, developmental, there's 3 kinds, right? There's the
expands.
Good. Expand or add. Result or purpose.
Purpose.
And explain or illustrate. Good. Okay, you guys remembered. All right, so synonymous is the second line matches the first. Okay. Contrastive is just in the word. The second line, or I should say one line contrasts the other. Developmental means the one line adds to the other. Result means one line is the result or purpose of the other. And then explain or illustrate is one line, explains the other. Okay. Now, usually it's the second line is being developed from the first, but not always. So we've seen some examples of that. Now, there's a fourth category. Anyone remember what that is? If you don't know what kind of parallelism it is, what do we
formal,
put? Ambut. Yeah.
Formal.
Okay. Or yeah, some call it formal. I just say we don't know. We don't know. Okay. Now, there is also a special class of parallelism called chiasm. Remember, that's where the second line is exactly reversed compared to the first line. And by this, I mean grammatically. So, for example, you may have a subject and then a verb, and then you might have in the second line the verb and then the subject. All right. So it's an exact reversal, and that is used for emphasis. Okay. Or you may have, there's other examples where sometimes the object, then the verb, and then the subject, and then the second line is the subject, the verb, and the object. Okay. There's different ways that it happens. But basically there's three basic types of parallelism: synonymous, contrastive, and developmental. And then developmental has three types in itself. Developmental just means that one line develops another, and it can develop it by adding more information, by illustrating, or by giving the result or the purpose. Okay. And we'll go through my example passage in Proverbs 1 just to review that. All right. In fact, here's the summary of the types of parallelism. And for chiasms, notice you can have a chiasm either from a synonymous or contrastive parallelism. So either one of those can form a chiasm in some cases. All right. Now, the third step, as I said, is then to take the parallelism from all the verses in your passage and see if you can note a pattern. Are all of them one kind of parallelism, or do you see a pattern in different types of parallelism that are used? Or many times there's no pattern, but I just think it's a good idea to look, because some passages will have all of one kind of parallelism, and then one verse will be different. And sometimes the author will do that in order to draw attention to that particular verse. So we just want to note if there's any patterns or not that you see. All right. So now let's do this for, I chose a passage from Proverbs 1, and we'll just go through these steps for this passage. Okay. And I'm just going to call on each of you guys to determine or to answer each of these examples. Okay. All right. So we'll start with we'll start from the bottom this time. Brother Ruel, we're going to give you verse 8. Go ahead and read the verse, and then in this case we're doing step 1. So just tell us how many lines. This should be pretty easy. Okay. And this is the New American Standard Version I'm using. Brother Ruel,
So,
can you see it?
so I have to identify only the lines. There are only verse 8, Proverbs 1.
We'll do both. Go ahead and identify the number of lines, and then tell us what kind of parallelism you see. All right, I'll have you do both steps. So go ahead
verse
and read.
8, it says, verse 8, it says, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching." There are only two lines here,
Okay,
and
there's
this is developmental parallelism, um, expanding.
okay. So let's take a look.
That be synonymous.
Yeah, let's first two lines. That's what's shown here in the New American Standard, and all the other translations that I checked have two lines. So yeah, now developmental is what Ruel said. Let me do this. But could it be, someone I heard said maybe synonymous?
Synonymous.
Who said synonymous? Is that you,
Eric.
Brother Eric?
Yeah,
What makes you think it's synonymous?
because of the father and mother. Instruction and teaching are just the same.
Yeah, so first we have your father matches your mothers. Then we have instruction matches teaching. And so here, I think has the idea of do not forsake.
Yes.
Okay, that's so I would agree. I think synonymous is more likely here because the grammar is the same. You have the verb, the command, then you have your father's instruction, and then the command in the second line, do not forsake, which is similar to here. Remember, here in the Hebrew mindset has the idea of obey. So do not forsake is the same idea, I think, your mother's teaching. Now, don't let that word "and" fool you, because I think sometimes when we see "and," we might think expand, right? But if all he's doing is, sometimes that "and" he's just giving a second statement, all right? So sometimes that word "and" might tell you expanding, but look for the pattern. Does the grammar match? And do the words in each line, are they synonymous with each other? So father and mother are not the same person, but it's still, right, one parent and the other parent. Instruction and teaching, those are synonyms, right? They both refer. And then hear or obey and do not forsake are also synonymous ideas. So I think this is synonymous parallelism here. Okay, that makes sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Verse 9. Kent, let me have you do this one.
Two lines. Indeed, they are graceful wreath for your head and ornaments about your neck. Synonymous.
Okay, how many lines we got here? 2 lines. And that's the same in every translation. All right, and then
With Ellipsis.
Synonymous.
synonymous. Okay. Now, let's look at it. So we have your head, your neck, graceful wreath, ornaments. And then, but they are here, but there's no they are in the second line. So how do we know it's synonymous?
Developmental.
It's Elysian.
Yeah. He didn't put this in the second line. Okay, so it's ellipsis. So notice the ellipsis here. They are is not in the second line, is not written in the second line, but it is assumed or implied to be there. Okay, so you remember we have ellipsis sometimes, which is when in poetry, remember that the poets often want to go shorten their verses. So sometimes rather than repeat the exact same thing, they will just take out those words, but it's assumed that they're there, right? Because ornaments, you know, the verse reads ornaments about your neck. Well, there's an assumed subject there and verb. Oops. They are ornaments about your neck. But he didn't put they are in here because he did not want to be redundant. He wanted to shorten it for the poetic effect. All right. So I think synonymous is the correct answer here. Okay. Now, if you say developmental addition, I mean, that's okay, because in a sense, you know, the second line, he's adding another statement to the first, but I think that synonymous would be probably closer to the kind of parallelism we have here. Any questions on that? Do you guys remember the ellipsis we talked about? Okay. Any questions on this one? Yeah, Jess.
How do this affect our interpretation of the thing?
It wouldn't, for this verse, you mean, would it matter if it's developmental or synonymous?
Yes, sir.
Is that what you're asking? Yeah, if that's what you're asking, for this particular verse, it's not going to affect the interpretation really at all, okay? Because it's still, he's saying there's two descriptions here, or remember, it's an image, right? What is a graceful wreath? Your father's instruction and your mother's teaching. They're a graceful wreath to your head. They're ornaments about your neck. So the interpretation is going to be the same. It's this image of the value of wisdom. In this case, specifically, the value of listening to your parents' guidance and instruction. They will be an adornment on you. They will help you to, in a sense, be beautiful in your behavior, I guess. Might be the idea. Or a reward could be the other picture he's describing here. Okay. And part of this too is we need to look and see how are the rest of the verses as far as what kind of parallelism they are, because that overall, normally if it's mainly developmental, then that's more of an instructive, gives more of an instructive idea or feel to the passage. Okay. But I think synonymous is appropriate here. It's a better fit. All right, let's go to verse 10. And Eric, why don't you take this one? How many lines do we have, and what kind of parallelism do you see?
My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. There are 2 lines in verse 10.
Yes, 2 lines.
Developmental.
Okay. And you say developmental.
By cola.
Developmental. What kind of developmental?
Explain. Oh,
Yeah, this one's
expand.
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 Yeah, maybe that's the closest I could say. It's definitely not synonymous, because there's no he's saying if sinners entice you, do not consent. So there's not synonyms that match in each of those lines. So it's definitely not synonymous. It's not contrastive. It has to be developmental in some way. So perhaps expanding on the first line would be, I think, the best way to see this.
Pastor Tim, the ellipsis can be used only in synonymous.
No, not necessarily. The ellipsis can be, it doesn't have to be synonymous. It usually is, but it doesn't have to be. Why do you
Can
think?
be son do not consent.
What's that?
Can be my son. If sin entices my son.
Yeah. Well, my son is is, remember we called that, my son is a apostrophe, direct
Yes.
address. Remember that? That's usually, and I think he used it in verse 8 too, right? Here, my son. So I
Yeah.
don't think there's
Here.
an ellipsis here. It's with my son. It's just he says it's direct address. It gives it, it really increases. It's like an appeal. It increases the emotion, right? When he says my son, I think there's more emphasis when he does that.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't think there's an ellipsis here. Now, if he had said something like this, if sinners entice you, do not listen. And then if he had said, do not consent, I could see then ellipsis being like the same thing, that if sinners entice you, do not consent. Okay? That could be an example. But in this case, he doesn't have do not listen here, right? He just says, if sinners entice you, don't consent. So that's just expanding, I think, on the first line.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Pastor German, I'll give you this one, verse 11.
So if they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without cause. 3 lines, Coca-Cola.
Well, just 3, so that's try.
Try cola. Okay, try cola. Okay. Oh, come with us, let us lie.
Okay, so now,
Synonymous.
okay, which lines are synonymous?
Yeah. The word let us.
All right, let us. So
Lie or ambush.
lie in wait.
Then ambush.
Ambush. Okay.
That's all.
Yeah, didn't you just have to ask though, is for blood, does that match this? Maybe. So you're saying line synonymous, lines 2 and 3, right? That's what you're saying?
Yes.
What about line 1?
Come with us.
How, and the rest of the lines? Yeah.
If they say, come with us. It can be.
So how does line 2 relate to line 1, for example?
So come with us and let us.
Developmental.
Yeah, I think developmental. And what kind?
Expand.
Yeah. So I think line 2 expands upon line 1. And we could say line 2 and line 3, right? They add more information to line 1. Okay? It's more of what they say. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. So that's adding to the first line. And then perhaps line 2 and 3 are synonymous with each other. I could see that. Now, there's something interesting with, let me show this to you. Now, normally what you want to do when you're looking at the lines, you want to compare to the other translations just to see. Okay, now notice we have here, hopefully you can see you guys see my Bible software?
Yes.
Let me let me increase the size a little bit here. For you. Okay, so Proverbs 1. Okay, so this is the New American Standard. Notice they put 3 lines. But if we go to ESV, notice what they do on verse 11. How many lines does the ESV have?
2 lines.
2. Now remember what I told you is what you want to do is compare 3 translations, and I had suggested use the New American Standard, the ESV, and then also the New King James. And notice the New King James has how many lines?
3 lines.
3. So then I just told you go with the 2 that are go with the
Similar.
majority. All right. In this case, then, so if you're reading ESV, you know, you would think, oh, it's just 2 lines, but actually, the New King James and the New American Standard both have 3 lines, and that's actually what it should be. All right. This is the only verse in this section that has 3 lines. All the other ones are 2 lines in every translation. But verse 11, there was a difference. Okay. Between the translations. The New American Standard, the New King James, even the NIV had 3 lines. I think the Holman Bible had 3 lines. So it's definitely 3 lines in this particular verse. But what's interesting is we're going to see that all the other verses here, notice they're all 2 lines. Verse 14, verse 15. The only one that's different is verse 11. Okay. Now, does that mean something? Maybe. We want to always be careful we don't assume or read too much into something like that. But whenever you have something that's different than the pattern of the verses around it, you should at least ask, you know, is that intentional by the author? Is that something he intended to do in order to draw attention to that particular verse? Okay, so it doesn't mean he did that it is intentional, but it could be. And so you just want to keep that in your mind as you study the passage. Does verse 11 seem to have some significance in this passage? Does it seem to be an important part that the author is focusing on? And right now, we can't say yet because we haven't studied it enough. But what we can say is, well, it is different in regards to the number of lines. Okay, so that's something just to notice. Because there are some poems, for example, let me see if I remember this. Is it Psalm 19? No, that's not it. I was trying to remember, there's an example where the poet used 2 lines and then the last verse he used 3 because he wanted to emphasize something, but that example is not coming to my mind. Okay, let's go back then to our passage here. So we've got verse 11. This is the only verse that's got 3 lines in it, and here line 2 and line 3 are expanding upon line 1. They're adding more information as to what the wicked sinners, what they're saying. And then line 2 and 3 look like they might be synonymous with each other. Okay. All right. Oh, in fact, I even put in your notes here the other translations. ESV had 2 lines. New King James had 3. So this just reminds us, make sure when you look at your number of lines, you are comparing those 3 translations so that in case there's any differences, just go with the 2 translations that match. Okay. All right. Let's go to verse 12. Continuing on in what the sinners were saying to try to entice they add this as well. And let's see. I think Brother Edwin, can you do verse 12 for us? Whoops, you're still muted.
Sorry, Pastor Tim.
No problem.
Let us swallow them alive like Sheol, even whole as those who go down to the pit. 2 lines.
Yep, 2 lines.
Developmental.
Okay, and how? And how is it developing?
Let us swallow. Expand.
Okay. Where you're saying line 2 expands or adds to line 1. Okay. Now, could we
How about synonymous, Pastor Tim?
okay, could synonymous be a possibility?
Sheol and pit.
Yeah, so we have Sheol and the pit, which are similar.
Then swallow to go down.
Yeah, well, let's see. If, again, if this is the intended idea, then it could be synonymous. But what I think he's doing here is just adding the second way that he's saying, let us swallow them alive like Sheol. You know, Sheol is you know, the grave. So it's like swallows people. So I think he's just adding on to this idea of Sheol. He's expanding on that. Let us swallow them alive like Sheol swallows people, even like those who go down to the pit. So it seems like because we would then have to say that basically this whole line was deleted, you know, the ellipsis here, but I don't think that would be, that's not typical.
Mm.
Okay, so I think Edwin,
Developmental, yeah.
yeah, I think Edwin's answer is correct. It's just adding to this idea of Sheol, just expanding upon that repetition. Really. Okay, good, very good. Eric, have you done one? I can't remember.
Tim, yes, Pastor Tim.
Did you do one already?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll have Brother Ramil do this one then.
We will find all kinds of precious wealth. We will fill our houses with spoil. 2 lines. I think it's synonymous.
Okay, and let's go through that. What would be matching here?
We will.
Okay, we will
Find and fill precious
Okay.
wealth and spoil.
Find
And fill.
Whoops. And
Find
fill.
all
Okay.
kinds. Fill our house. Precious wealth, spoil.
Yeah, precious wealth and spoil. Yeah, I think synonymous makes sense. We can see a matching there within this verse. Okay. Yeah, maybe find all kinds might be it gives a picture of fill. Okay. Okay.
All Pastor Tim kinds is italic.
Yeah, it's implied. We literally it's we will find all precious wealth. But so kinds, I think it's a fair addition or assumption. Let's see what the English Standard says. Find all precious goods. Yeah, because it's literally we will we will find all precious, what's that word? We will discover all precious wealth. So it's literally all wealth, all good wealth we will discover. Oh. And then it says, we shall fill our houses full. There's something, I didn't see this before. Okay, let's do this. Let's look at and what you need to do as well is two things. One is first, as you look at a verse, and let me just maybe put this here as a reminder. When we're doing parallelism, there's really three things you need to do. First is you identify the number of lines, but then you identify the type of parallelism. Let's see. Identify the number of lines. And this means you need to consult with the ESV, NAS, and the New King James. Okay. Then secondly, identify the type of parallelism. And then with that, you need to consult, remember the interlinear, to see the word order. Okay. Because you want to check for chiasms. So for example, let me take you to the interlinear for this verse. So what we should be doing with each verse is looking at the interlinear as well. Okay, so let's see. Was it Ramil? Were you the one doing this verse?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna pull up the interlinear, and I want you to take a look at it and tell us, do you see any kind of a reverse or reversing of the order in the original Hebrew? All right. Can you see the interlinear okay here? Let me try to expand it a little bit.
Will spoil our house.
Okay, so notice here.
The house teacher.
This is the literal word order. It goes from right to left. So we have here, what's line 1? The literal word order or here.
Possession.
What's it say? All possessions. Precious. We shall find. All right. And then what's the next line?
Our houses with spoil.
Yeah, but how does it start?
Houses.
We shall fill. You see that?
No.
We shall fill.
Will fill our houses with spoil.
Our houses with spoil.
We shall fill our houses
with spoil.
With spoil. You see, notice this. Notice here we've got.
Chiastic.
Yeah, it's a chiasm. All possessions precious we shall find. And then notice the second line starts with the verb. We shall fill our houses with spoil. So he reverses the word order. In the first line, he starts with the object. All possessions precious we shall find. In the second line, he starts with the subject and verb. We shall fill our houses with spoil.
Get some.
I think it might be a chiasm then. So let's go back to our notes here. Oops. Okay. All right. All right. So here, notice all possessions precious we shall find. I just put the literal. We shall
Yes, yes.
fill
Houses with spoil.
our houses. So notice here, we shall find is the end of line 1, but we shall fill is the beginning of line 2.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically what he has here is the object, the subject, and the verb, and then the next line is the subject, the verb, and the object. So notice he begins with the object in the first line and he ends with it in the second. So it looks like he reverses it. So I would put it like this. All precious possessions we shall find. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Okay? And that puts emphasis on the 2 lines in the middle there. It's just drawing attention to that we shall find, we shall fill. So it's on the focus is on the action here, right? The sinners are enticing. And so here in verse 13, there's a focus on, again, their actions. We shall find, we shall fill. There's emphasis there because it looks like there's a chiasm here. Now it's still synonymous, but by going back to the interlinear, looking at the word order in the original language, we can see there's been a reverse in the second line. You guys, any questions on that? You guys remember that?
Yes,
So-
Pastor Tim.
So just want to remind you, after you you identify your parallelism, what kind it is, just check the interlinear. And here it's BibleHub.com is what I use often. And just check there and look at the literal word order and see if it looks like there's been any reversing.
Yes.
Okay.
So Pastor Tim, can we do both?
Can you do both what?
Synonymous and chiasm,
Yes.
verse 13.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
synonymous because it's
Yes.
matching in its, we will, the subject matches, the verb has a similar idea, and the wealth and spoil has a similar idea. So it is synonymous, and it also is a chiasm. So they can be both. That's why I said at the beginning, there's 3 main categories or types of parallelism: synonymous, contrastive, and developmental. Chiasm is not a 4th type necessarily. It's by itself, because you can still have synonymous or contrastive and it be a chiasm also. And we see an example here. Okay?
Okay, Pastor Tim.
And like I said, chiasm is helpful to notice because it often it's intentional by the author in order to draw attention to the middle, to what is flipped. Okay? In this case, it was the verb that was flipped. We shall find and we shall fill. So the first line ends with we shall find. The second line begins with we shall fill. And that's where he's drawing more attention. It's almost like this. It's almost like if we translated it, we would, put it in bold. That part of the sentence. Okay? That's what a chiasm's doing. It's telling you, give more attention here to this part of the verse.
So Pastor Tim, if we read verse 13 in chiasm, it would be like this: all kinds of precious wealth we will find. Our houses with spoil we shall fill.
No, actually, it'll be all precious possessions. Or here, I'll do this. Yeah, all all precious. He
All
has
kinds.
wealth, right? Precious wealth for all kinds
We will find.
of precious wealth we shall find. And then the second line is
We shall fill.
we
shall
shall
fill
fill our houses with spoil. Okay. So in the New American Standard put the verb and the subject at the beginning of the sentence. And in the Hebrew, it's technically at the end of the first line. So this would be the more literal translation, which follows the word order of the Hebrew, which okay. Does that answer your question,
Okay.
German? All right, and then I just
Yes, Pastor
highlighted.
Tim. Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. Now, let's keep going here. Okay, brother Boy, I think we're to you. Verse 14. Can you read it, and then tell us the number of lines and the type of parallelism?
Verse 14. Throw in your lot with us, we shall all have one purse. Two lines. Developmental.
Okay. What kind do you see here?
True.
I'm sorry, say
And
again.
then true.
Yeah, what kind of developmental parallelism? Expand? Yeah.
Yeah.
Line 2 adds to line 1. Okay. Yeah, because he's not, it's not synonymous here. He's just giving more additional information. Throw in your lot with us. In other words, come with us and do this, and we shall all have one purse. Could even be, now that I think about it, developmental result too. Line 2 gives the result of line 1. If you join us, we'll all share the money or share the wealth. But maybe the first one is better. Okay. So far, these verses, verse 14 is just part of the enticement of the sinners. All right. It's taken up a few verses. All right. Let's try verse. Now, if we go to interlinear, we wouldn't see any change in the order of the words. So we'll just keep going. Verse 15. Kent, I think we're back to you.
My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your feet from their path. Two lines.
Yep.
Then developmental.
Okay, what kind?
Add.
Okay. So line 2 adds. Now let's check. Could this be synonymous?
Yeah, Pastor Tim, I think it's synonymous.
Synonymous.
Okay, let's check that. Okay, we have the apostrophe. That's a separate statement of emphasis. Do not walk.
Keep your feet.
Keep your feet.
Or do not keep your feet from the. Keep your feet.
the way with them,
Their fat.
their path.
Synonymous.
So maybe, right? Because way and path, maybe this. Here, let's do this. I think with them, there.
Mm.
Do not walk, because way and path are a similar idea. Do not walk, keep your feet, similar idea. Them and there. So maybe synonymous. What do you think, Kent? Do you want to stick with developmental or?
You have to change your mind.
What's that,
Change your
Kent?
mind. Change your mind. And
Don't let them influence you. Have your own conviction, brother. What do you think?
You have to repent.
Both of them.
Yeah, synonymous. Persuade me. They persuade.
Okay. I think synonymous seems to make, again, because we can see the matching, see the synonymous, the matching terms here, I think. All right, Jess, I'm going to give you verse 16. All right.
This for me is again.
Yeah.
For the street run to evil, and the hasten to shed blood. By cola, the line.
Okay. 2
and
lines. Good.
synonymous.
Okay. You say synonymous?
Synonymous.
Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think.
Okay. So what matches then?
Street run to evil. The street, the hasten to shed blood. Or probably developmental ambition.
Oh, now you're changing your mind, huh? Okay.
I think developmental.
Synonymous.
Yeah,
Well,
I think
let's look at it. Certainly developmental could make sense. It adds, line 2 adds to line 1, but let's see, maybe it's synonymous. Okay, we have run
Hasten.
and hasten
They there.
Okay.
to evil.
Shed blood.
Okay, and certainly to shed blood is evil, a form of evil. Then he has their feet. They. I think synonymous.
But now, Jace.
What's your conviction, Pastor Jess?
Why they change to developmental?
Change ang mind.
You think synonymous or development? You still?
It's safe to repent.
Yeah, I think synonymous makes sense. Okay, now let's check the interlinear here and see if there's any let's look at verse 16. All right. Okay, so just take a look at verse 16. Do you see any reversing in the word order at all? Or
for their feet
Run
to evil run, and they make haste to shed.
Samot na taglibog ano.
Wala lagi blood ya.
what do you see? Are you shedding blood right now?
Nosebleed.
Nosebleed.
Make haste.
Yeah, notice the verbs again. You see the verb here?
Chiasm. Oh, chiasm.
Run is the verb, make haste. All right. So it looks like, again, there was a switch.
Synonymous
The first line ends with the verb, and the second line begins with the verb. Okay. See that? Here's the first line. For, and this is their feet, right? To evil, they run. The feet run to evil. And then the second line begins here. They make haste. Again, it's a verb. Starts with a verb, to shed blood.
The blood, yeah.
So it's
Could it be
Synonymous chiasm.
yeah, it looks like chiasm, and that would tell
Chiasm.
us then it's likely synonymous, not developmental. All right, it's usually synonymous or contrastive that are chiasm. So this is how I would show it on my sheet here. For their feet to evil, and then the verb run, and then they make haste to shed blood. Okay, so the emphasis again is on the action, on the verbs here. Okay, so it looks like synonymous chiasm. First line ends with the verb, second line begins with the verb. All right, any questions on that, guys? Do you see that? Verse 16.
Okay, but problem is if you use English Bible, we cannot see that pattern, the chiastic pattern.
I'm sorry, I can't. The pattern in what?
In
We're just
translation.
using the Bible,
Yeah, the
English
trans.
translation.
Yeah.
Yeah, the chiastic pattern is not obvious.
Yeah, you won't. You don't often see it in the translation. That's right. Sometimes you do. Sometimes they will put it there, but most translations, for some reason, do not, because when you're reading it, especially if you're for English, you normally in English you have the subject, the verb, then the object, right? That's the normal pattern in English. So normally, if you're doing an English translation, you won't put the verb at the beginning because it's not. That's not normally how the word order in English. But in Hebrew, the word order is flexible, as it is in Greek, by the way. In Greek, the word order can often be changed in order to give emphasis. In Hebrew poetry, the word order can change for emphasis. And that's what we see here with this chiasm, where the author puts the verb at the end of the first sentence and then the first line, and then starts the second line with a verb. And so a lot of times English translations won't match that because they're trying to make it more readable, and it's more readable in English by going subject, verb, object. Unfortunately, that means then you can't see if there's a chiasm here. That's why you need to look at the interlinear, because it will give you the actual word order of the verse. Okay. Now, I would not call that a mistranslation. They're still accurately translating the words and the meaning. It's just that poetic characteristic they're missing out on. They're not showing you. So that's why we need to do the extra step and look in the interlinear to tell us if there is chiasm, because again, that will help us see any emphasis that is being given in the passage or any focus. Okay. All right. Let's go to verse 17. And let's see, Edwin, or how about Eric? Eric, I'll have you do this one.
Verse 17, indeed, it is useless to spread the baited net in the sight of any bird. 2 lines by Cola. Then developmental,
What kind?
expand.
Yeah, I think expand. Line 2 adds more information to line 1. Okay. Now notice, if we were to say, well, could it be synonymous? Well, we'd have to say, okay, what's the verb? Useless to spread. Now, is there a matching? There's no matching. The verb in the second line is sight. They don't match, right? Or the baited net. That's the object in the first line. If we look at the object in the second line, any bird, they don't match. So they're not, this can't be synonymous. Okay, it's, as Eric said, I agree, it's developmental. Okay. All right, good. Edwin, I'm going to give verse 18 to you. We've got just 2 more verses here. Verse 18.
But they lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush their own lives. Developmental.
Okay, it's 2 lines, right?
2 lines, 2 lines, 2 lines.
Okay, developmental. All right, what kind?
Expand.
Expand. Okay, so here, let's just confirm to see if it's possible that it could be synonymous. We'll just check they subject.
Lie.
All right, so those match. Lie in wait.
Ambush.
An
Ambush.
ambush. And then their own blood.
Lives.
Their own lives.
Their own lives.
So it looks like it might be synonymous.
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 See that? Because it matches, and same subject, lie in wait and ambush is a similar idea, and then their own blood, their own lives. So that also is a similar idea. So I think synonymous makes more sense for verse 18. All right. Okay, so then what we want to do is check, okay, synonymous. So is there a chiasm here? So Edwin, let's look at our interlinear and see, this is verse 18, right? So
For their feet.
see if there's a,
But they for their own blood.
okay, what do you see? What's the literal word order here?
They for their own blood.
But they, for their own blood, lie in wait.
They look secretly.
They lurk secretly. O Chiasm yun po, no? Lie in wait and lurk secretly.
I think some Pastor Tim.
Yeah, what do you notice that again, the verb is line 1 ends in a verb, lie in wait or ambush. Line 2 begins with the verb. Sorry, that's ambush or lurk secretly, but it's that idea of ambush. So literally, so if we go back to our notes here,
Chiasm.
literally it's, but they for their own blood lie in wait. And then ambush, they ambush their own lives. So again, the verb, line 1 ends in the verb. So I'd put it like this. And line 2 begins with the verb. So again, the focus is on the action here. And what's interesting, notice he says this is the consequences, right? Of they lie in wait for their own blood. So these sinners, right, who are trying to entice others, in the end, actually are destroying themselves. So they lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush their own lives. And the emphasis is on those verbs. Again, because of the chiasm, the reverse, the switching of the verb location in the sentence from the end of the first line and at the beginning of the second line. So we've seen now, what, 3 or 4 verses here that have a chiastic structure. Okay. Are there any questions
Pastor Tim,
on that? Yeah.
chiasm sometimes comes out with synonyms.
Yeah, chiasm can be either synonymous, it's usually synonymous, but could also be contrastive.
Okay.
Contrastive. Okay, it's usually synonymous. Can also be contrastive. Would not be developmental because, again, remember, synonymous and contrastive will match. They'll have the subjects will be similar, the verbs will be similar, and the objects will be similar. But in developmental, you don't have that. And so you won't have a chiasm with a developmental verse. Usually chiasm will be with synonymous, but I've noticed sometimes with contrastive as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Pastor Tim.
All right. All right, good. So we have one more left for, let's see, Ruel, why don't you take this one, the last verse, verse 19 here.
Verse 19. So are the ways of everyone who gains by violence. It takes away the life of its possessors. It's bicola and it's developmental expanding.
Okay, so you have bicola, two lines, and then developmental. You say expand?
Yes.
All right. And let's see. So are the ways of everyone who gains by violence. It takes away the life of its possessors. So expand, maybe even result. I don't know. Is that line 2? Could line 2 be the result of line 1? Or do you think it's line 2 adds to line 1? What do you think? Ruel, you think expand or result?
So are the everyone who gains by violence. It takes away the life of its possessors. I think it's more of a result.
Yeah, that's
The
what I
one who
was
gains
thinking.
violence.
Yeah, at first I thought expand, but then I thought, well, actually, he's not saying the ways of everyone who gains violence. I don't think he's saying the second line is not adding to that. I think it's actually the result of that. Everyone who gains by violence, what's the result? Takes away the life of its possessors. Everyone who gains by violence basically takes their own life away. So I think result to me made a little more sense as I thought about it. Okay.
Okay.
What's your conviction, brother? If you're going to preach this passage, which is it?
I go with your conviction now.
Developmental results.
Result.
I'm convinced.
Okay, you get an A for the class. Very good. All right. So what we want to do at this point then, we've just done these 12 verses, is now in step 3 is to summarize them as far as to see if there's any pattern. if I can get to it. All right, so here is, and this one we actually put down wrong. All right, so here's what we've got. Let me check. Chiasm in 18, 16. And 13. Okay. All right. So what I like to do then in the third step is just take all of these and see if there's any obvious pattern. All right. So what do we see here? In this, we see basically it looks like a mix between synonymous and developmental, right?
So description and command, description, command.
Yeah, there's no, so we have these two, we'll just highlight the synonymous. Okay, those are the synonymous. And then the rest are developmental, except for the last one. Okay, which by the way is the end of the stanza. It changes to a developmental result. Okay, so possibly, maybe verse 19, because it's the end of the stanza, and he's describing what the outcome of the ones who try to entice others, that what ends up happening in verse 19, the result is they destroy themselves. So maybe Solomon did that intentionally. But other than that, half of the verses have synonymous parallelism, with some of them with chiasm, and then the other half are developmental expansion. Okay, so maybe the only thing that you might want to pay attention to is that last verse that seems to be different than the rest. Okay. Now, again, what this step is meant to do is just to get us thinking about how each line relates to one another as you go through the passage. Again, knowing that in Hebrew poetry, often parallelism is used. And so what we're trying to do is just, by this step, look at each verse and see if what the connection is between the two lines or three lines within the verse. Okay. And so in this case, that's what it just helps us to begin thinking about how the lines within each verse relate. Now, later when we do the diagram, we'll be looking at how do the verses relate to each other. Parallelism just looks at how do the lines within the verse relate to each other. The diagram will show us how do the verses themselves relate to each other. Okay. So you guys, your passages are all 6 or 7 verses long. So this assignment shouldn't take you too long if you can remember these different types of parallelism that are used. All I would say is just remember, as we talked about before, step 1 is identify how many lines, and you're going to want to again use the ESV, the NAS, and the New King James translations just to confirm how many. Step 2 is identify the type of parallelism. Okay. And with that, use the interlinear to see if there's chiasm. And then step 3 is just to compile the results. Note any possible patterns. Okay? That's all we're
So,
doing
Pastor
in
Tim,
this assignment. Yeah.
we will be doing the whole chapter assigned to us for this assignment, right?
No, you can just do your passage. You don't have to do the whole chapter.
All right.
I
Thank you.
think the whole chapter would help just as far as looking for a pattern, but as far as what I'm requiring, just do your passage.
Pastor Tim,
Yeah.
what is advantage if is the chiasm? How do we interpret or expound if we see the chiasm in the text, in the passage?
Yeah, good question. The chiasm, what that tells you is it's an author's way to express emphasis or focus. For example, let's see. Let's go to that one verse that I. Okay, when we found this in verse 13, where remember here, the literal word order is this, where line 1 ends with the verb find, we shall find. Line 2 begins with the verb, we shall fill. And what that means then is the author is drawing attention to the verbs here. Okay, line 12 or verse 12, he didn't do that. He just wrote it, let us swallow them alive, even whole as those who get down to the pit. Verse 14, he didn't do that. Throw in your lot with us. We shall all have one purse. But in verse 13, he does intentionally reverse the order of the second verse, second line. And I think normally what that means is it's that the word, it's what ends the first line and begins the second line. Those are the that's what the author is focusing our attention on. So as far as preaching, when you have a chiasm, then that's telling you that there's emphasis or focus on the verbs here. So when you're preaching this, you can say that. You don't have to explain chiasm and what that is, but you can say the way the author has ordered these two lines, he's putting emphasis on the action here. He's focusing our attention. He wants us to give special attention to the action that we will find and we will fill. All right. So that these sinners who are enticing, they're trying to emphasize that, look, we're gonna find all kinds of wealth. We're gonna be rich. We're gonna fill our houses. We're gonna make all kinds of money. Just follow us. Come on with us. All right. So you would give emphasis as you're explaining this passage. You would give emphasis to the verbs in that verse. All right.
Yes, Pastor.
That's what chiasm does. It's like a repetition. It's like exclamation. It draws attention to that. Now, if he had said like here, in verse 14, behold, throw your lot in with us. That word behold is also meant for emphasis. It's meant, and it will draw attention to the whole verse. When he says behold, then he's saying it's going to draw attention to the whole verse for emphasis. When it's a chiasm, more attention's being drawn to what got reversed in the second line. And in this case, it's the verbs. All right, we see, for example, another example of this. In Psalm 51, it's full of chiasm, which makes sense because there's a lot of emotion here. And notice in this particular case, let me see what the New American Standard did. Yeah. Can you guys see this? This is Psalm 51.
Yes.
Notice here, verse 1. Be gracious to me, O God, according to your loving kindness. That's line 1. And notice, actually, the English translation does identify the chiasm. Do you see how the first line ends? According to your loving kindness. And then how does the second line begin? According to the greatness of your compassion. So there, it does indicate, by the English translation, there's a chiasm. The focus being God's character. David here, he's giving emphasis to the compassion and loving kindness of God. And so he forms a chiasm, giving focus on God's character. And then I think the second line, oh, wait, here it is. Okay, wash. Yeah, the second line, verse, wash me thoroughly, and then from my iniquity is the end of the first line. The beginning of the second line is from my sin, cleanse me. So he, in the Hebrew over here, he does reverse. This is from my iniquity, and then the second line is then from my sin, cleanse me. So in that case, the translation did not see that, but there's a chiasm in the second line as well. And the focus there is on my iniquity and my sin. Now, what's interesting is this. Verse 1, there's a chiasm focusing on God's character. Verse 2, there's a chiasm focusing on David's sin. So even between those two verses, there's almost a contrast. God is full of loving kindness and compassion. David says, I'm full of sin. I need to be cleansed from it. And we see that because of the chiasm. So literally, verse 2 should say, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and from my sin cleanse me. And then again, I think, notice verse 5, the English translation does pick up the chiasm. I was brought forth. Notice it ends in iniquity. And then the line 2 begins, and in sin, my mother conceived me. Again, a chiasm, synonymous in this case, with the focus being on David's sin.
So in verse 5, Pastor Tim, there's double emphasis because there's a presence of the word behold. So
Yes.
we need to emphasize the whole verse
Yes.
and also the chiasm.
You've got it. All right. So yeah, there's additional emphasis there. And what you'll notice in this psalm is several times there's a chiasm that is focused on his sin. I think at least 3 times. Let me see. Is it verse 9? Hide your face from my sin and all my iniquity blot out. Yeah. So there's another chiasm in verse 9. Hide your face from my sins. All my iniquities blot out is literally. So here he keeps forming a chiasm around my iniquity, my sin. That's giving us, there's emphasis there, and it's repetition. So on top of the chiasm, there's repetition here. And it's really focused. David's saying my sin, my iniquity, my wickedness. He's taking full responsibility for his sin. And we see that in the emotional emphasis given by these chiasms. So when you preach this passage, you can strongly preach. David completely accepts the responsibility for his sin. He's not blaming anyone else. He's saying it's my sin, my iniquity, my transgression.